All right. Well, good morning. It's great to be here with you again. I trust you all slept well. I hope so. You all have your coffee and all ready to go and learn more. Um, it's such a great church, and I just really appreciate being here. I wanted to start off this morning with a little bit of discussion. I did want to share also that we've covered such a large swath of history and different topics. You know, this is just kind of the way it works when you only have 10 hours to really get into something. And even though we've covered some pretty significant events, there's so much more detail to these things. And the student of history probably wants to do more research. So first of all, I think it's great that you guys are all taking Bible classes, college classes, to extend your understanding. Let me just say to you, don't ever give up learning. Just off topic here, just don't ever give up learning. Become lifetime learners. It's just so important that we just continue to grow, that we continue to understand and get more information. In the bibliography, which starts on page 207, if you just turn quickly back to the bibliography, you're going to see just all of the pages of books, articles, just all kinds of things that I used in researching, over the last, this is many years really. So it's not just for this book, but for other things I've done. I've written papers for like PhD program I was involved in and things of that nature. But you can use some of these maybe even as starter points if you want to do more research and get more detail. Like we covered the Ottoman Empire in probably 10 minutes, but it lasted 600 years, and it basically was gigantic. There was so many aspects to it. I talked about the Janissaries, who were pretty much, mostly they were kids that were captured, children, Christian children that were slaves, and then they were turned into soldiers. But there was, the people that were running the empire at that time. They had other things that they were doing. It wasn't just about warfare even. They were doing political types of things. They were gaining clout through trading with other communities. And so they were just growing empires back then. So there's so much more to this than simply even just the spread of Islam or how that happened. There are all the other dynamics that would happen in a civilization and in communities that were merging together and all of those types of things. So if you want to do more research, that would be great. It's a good place to start. I want to have a little bit of class discussion now and just kind of back and forth. Remember that this is being videotaped, so I will try to reflect what you're saying or mimicking, and so not mimicking, but asking questions or whatever, and I will try to reflect that. How many of you would say that you've had interaction with Muslims before? Anybody in the room? Okay, a few of you. Can we talk a little bit about that? Can you share just briefly?
Through work.
Through work?
Yeah, and they're very kind people.
Yes.
They're very easy to talk to and stuff. Just normal people, really.
Yeah, they are kind. How do you work with them often, or is it like an everyday type of thing? Or?
Quite a few years ago when I was in Washington.
Oh, in Washington. Okay.
Yeah, so it was
Washington State or Washington, D.C.?
Washington State.
Washington State, okay. What kind of industry was that in?
Railroad.
Railroad, okay. Cool. Somebody else raised their hand over here. Okay, right here.
I was actually at one of my younger daughter's friend's birthday parties.
A younger daughter's,
And the mother,
a daughter's birthday party.
yeah, and the gal that was there, she was incredibly beautiful, and she had a, cover. She didn't have a burqa on, but she had a covering.
Okay, she had a head covering.
And her daughter was sitting there with she was lovely, and I said,
Oh.
where are you from? And she said, Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia.
And they've been here just a couple of years. Her husband was, I believe, a professor at the U. And it was just
So he was teaching here, and so his wife was attending the birthday party with her daughter. Okay.
And
Oh, wonderful. Good for you. Good for you. And somebody else raised their hand over here. Yeah.
I had an encounter at the airport.
At the airport. Okay.
Yes.
What was that about?
They were here helping their son settle as a teacher at the high school level.
So their son was a teacher?
Yeah.
Okay.
Helping him settle here as a teacher.
Okay, so they were helping him settle, and you met them at the airport.
And she was standoffish. She was friendly and nice, but standoffish, and I felt she had an agenda.
Oh, okay. So, well, you can see between those different conversations then probably different personalities coming out in all of it. Well, that's actually very interesting. So one was a job setting, one was at a birthday party, and then one was simply somebody you met at an airport. Okay, and then so are there Muslims here at the universities near here?
Yes.
I,
A large population of Muslims.
a large population in this area.
They've settled as refugees.
That is settled as refugees. Okay, yeah. In the Boise area, I know in the public schools we have over 100 languages spoken. Think about that. That sometimes they have to figure out. My wife is a school teacher, so sometimes they have to figure out where they're going to get an interpreter for, one of these languages that comes from all over the world. But we also have quite a population, and we have like an Islamic center at the university there. Which, do you have that here? You might, like a student union, an Islamic student union. Yeah, you probably do. One of the ways actually to reach out to Muslims is to get to know these young people that are coming to university. And there's also, you were talking about like refugees coming in. World Relief is a great organization, and organizations like that, and sometimes they take volunteers where you can host a family from overseas. Not that you necessarily have to put them in your home, but you can be like the person to greet them at the airport. You can welcome them to the United States. You can be there for them, and that's kind of like spreading the light in a sense. And then eventually you might get to know them. I was talking to somebody the other day who had ended up. He actually works in a population in a jail. He's one of the guards, and there's Muslims in there. And so sometimes he will get in conversations with them about their faith. And sometimes, they'll share their faith, and then they'll ask him what he believes. So it gives him an opportunity to open up to them about Christianity. That's a great way to actually to talk to people about their faith, is maybe ask them, because most people have had a spiritual journey in life of one sort or another. And so even taking the topic of Islam out of it, sometimes a good approach is to ask them about their spiritual journey. If you're in a place where that kind of comment would make sense, you don't just say that at work necessarily, unless it's the right kind of atmosphere. But those are some good things. And then, just thinking about maybe the Crusades, because we covered that briefly, because there's so much more to it. You could actually spend an entire college semester, or you could do a degree or even a PhD in the subject of the Crusades. Can you think, or since we started talking about it, can you think of any kind of alternatives maybe that could have happened rather than the Crusades? And I know we can't just judge these people 1,000 years ago, but just looking at it from a modern perspective, can you look back and think, well, maybe there was something else that could have been done? Does anybody have any thoughts along those lines? Do you think the Crusades were necessary? Do you think the way they responded? You do. Can you give us a couple of thoughts about it? Yeah.
I don't know that I feel.
And would you mind? I know it's kind of late in the game, but as you're speaking, could you kind of state your name, and so that I can get to know you just a little bit?
My name's Renette.
Renette. Okay.
I don't know that I agree with how they handled it, but I think it was necessary, and I think it
So just for the camera, so you aren't sure if you agree how they handled it, but you think it was necessary.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you expound upon that just a little bit?
Well, that was interesting for me in this book, because I know sometimes in this world of digital hatefulness, a lot of times people who say they're the loving people, but look at their crusades.
Oh, let me just reflect this for a minute. This is good. So, yeah, in this world of internet, the atheists and the people that don't like Christianity, we use the Crusades as uh, as something wrong that we did way back
That
when.
the Christians are just as bad as
That
all
we are
the
as bad
other
as the
bloody
Muslims.
things.
Okay,
Right.
I appreciate that comment.
And so that was a very interesting part to me in this study of seeing the reasoning behind the Crusades and all that.
That they had reasons for the
Right,
Crusades
right.
to go forward. Okay, that it wasn't just a bunch of Christians going, oh, we're going to go out and get you.
Right, or saying,
But
we're being like a lot of the other faiths and saying we're going to spread our faith and whatever through war. It was,
Right,
it was
right,
more
right.
of a defensive move.
It was a
not
defensive
offensive.
move. That was excellent, excellent. Somebody else want to chime in on that? It's a great answer. Does anybody else have any other ideas, like alternatives, or does pretty much everybody then kind of think that? Yeah, go ahead. Go.
My name is Shirley,
Shirley.
and I really like that the spirit of protecting what they had came upon them. And
Like you mean those in the Christian countries?
Yes.
The spirit of protecting what they had.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
That's what you had written in your book, that they had, got that spirit to go and protect what they had,
Mm-hmm.
instead of just letting happen what was happening.
So instead of just sitting by defenselessly, they
Laying
decided
down,
to respond.
surrendering,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, to respond.
Mm-hmm. That's good insight there. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
My name's Carnita.
Carnita?
I think that the Roman Catholic Church played a huge part in the Crusades.
Oh, that's interesting. The Roman Catholic Church played a huge part. Okay, go ahead.
I've just watched and read a lot of different stuff that the non-believers were at war with the Catholic Church just as much as they were at war with Muslims. So
Do you mean the non-believers in Europe at that
Yeah.
time? So the non-believers were at war with the Catholic Church
right,
as much as the non-believers were at war with.
just as much as the Roman Catholic Church was at war with the Muslims.
Oh, just as much as the Catholic Church was at war with the Muslims. Now, what do you mean by that?
Well, just that there was a lot of attempt to control what the people believed at the time.
Attempt to control by the Catholic Church
Correct.
what the people believed? Okay.
Correct. Just in non-believers, and I mean, it was really early on that they were trying to spread the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
And the Roman Catholic Church didn't do necessarily the greatest job at doing that.
Right.
I think that the Roman Catholic Church tried to keep people ignorant as to what the Bible had to say.
So you think the Roman Catholic Church tried to keep people ignorant as to what the Bible had to say?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, there certainly is a lot of. It's a very complex thing when you look at the Middle Ages. You have, and we didn't really have time, but it's in the notes and it's in the book, and you can study it on your own. But there were crusades actually against Christians. The whole idea started off as crusades against the Muslims. And by the way, even the name crusade, let me just kind of digress for a second. The name crusade comes from the idea of making the sign of the cross. And up until this very day, we use the word crusade in our culture and in our language. And it means it's kind of morphed into different ideas today from what it was originally, but it's still this idea of taking a cause and pushing forward in a cause. But back then, there certainly was a hand by Rome to suppress other ideas that were emerging, even in the Christian ranks, and other ideas about how the gospel should be spread and what it took to be a Christian. You have the Wendish Crusades, you have the Albigensian Crusades, and unfortunately, this idea, when it broke out against the Muslims, all of a sudden it was like, well, they were defending within their own borders, or even going north to where the Vikings had been and things like that, and trying to conquer them there. So that's very, very keen insight there. But we also have to remember that a lot of what took place back then, there was a lot of ignorance, but people couldn't read that well, and there was a lot of ignorance. That wasn't necessarily perpetrated by the Catholic Church, I don't believe, but it was there because of a lack of education among the masses. There's also this idea that quite a few times Rome was actually sacked, and they were just trying to survive. Sometimes Rome was not the center of Catholicism. Sometimes it moved to France. There was seasons of time where there was more than one pope, actually, popes that were fighting against one another for control because they had different ideas of how Christianity should be. And there was a season of time where a lot of what was happening really in the way of Christianity was in Ireland. And Ireland, there's a book that was written, how the Irish saved Christianity. There was a big amount of time there where a lot of the things that we now know today would have been lost if it weren't for the Irish. And so, so those of you that are Irish, just, we thank you for that. But a lot took place back then, some very good insights, and it was a struggle, that's for sure. So what stands out, one last discussion point, what stands out as a major difference between Christianity and Islam? What stands out to you? And I know we've talked about this a little bit, but as we've covered these lessons now, what stands out to you as maybe a significant difference between Christianity and Islam? Yes.
Probably.
And what's your name?
My name's Jen.
Jen? Okay.
The fact that as a believer, as a Christian, we have the love of God in our life, and we live to express that love,
Mm.
to welcome people in. And Muslims don't live the statement made that they don't have love in their heart.
Mm-hmm.
That's like really eye-opening to me.
Okay. Thanks, Jen. So the idea is that as Christians, we live with love in our hearts, and we try to spread that love of Jesus Christ. And there was a statement made that Muslims do not have love in their hearts. I do want to take a moment here and say, though, that was one person's perspective about Muslims, that they did not have love in their hearts. I think, maybe the lady that you met at the birthday party, she might have a different take on that because, she thinks she has love in her heart. I do think, though, that maybe the difference is that where we ended last night, we serve a God who is love, and they serve a God who is loving. At least they think he is in some aspects of his life. But that's one of the 99 aspects of him. And so, the love that we think of in Jesus Christ is really much more profound and life-changing and world-changing than the love that they're talking about. But you know how it is as a Christian, until you actually experience that deep love of Christ in your life, you don't necessarily really realize that there's a difference, such a difference in what's taking place. So that's a really good point to bring out. Thank you. Anybody else? A major difference?
Well, I was thinking, like with a lot of the other cults, it's a lot of the difference is grace versus works. A lot of the cults are very much for you have to do this and have to do this and have to do this, and then you'll try to reach levels or whatever.
I so agree with that.
Whereas in the Christian faith, it's all about what Jesus did for us.
Yeah, works versus grace. In reality, it's so true what you're saying. I'm considered somewhat of an expert on cults and world religions, even though there's so much more that I could know. But I've never really found, and I've read a lot of their books, of the cults and the world religions, they all have a system of works for salvation at some level. And they don't necessarily recognize that when they're doing it, because they look at Christians and they say, well, yeah, but you guys have works too. But the key difference is that we are not working for salvation. You know, we might do works, but it's because we are thankful for what God has done for us. But he did everything for us on the cross when he died for us and gave his life for us and ransomed us from eternity of death. And so we're thankful for what he did. We do good works. We try to do good works. But there's such a key difference. Rather than, you know, going door to door and knocking and having to put in so many hours, or even the works that the Muslims do, the 5 daily prayers and all of this, where they just think that they're going to make their way to a better place, a better state. So key difference right there. Anybody else? Maybe one more, and then we'll, yes.
The oppression of women and,
That's just unbelievable, isn't it?
yeah,
The oppression of women.
Christianity doesn't have that.
I truly, and what's your name again? Vicky, that's right. Vicky, I truly believe that when you look at the countries that are dominated by Islam in the world, and there's like 50 countries, and Turkey maybe is the most progressive, maybe they're the most modern, if we can characterize one of them. But you know, even there's such issues. But of those problems, you usually see oppression of people. Whereas when you look at the nations, actually, and I know I'm biased, I proclaim it, I'm biased, you know, to the video, I'm biased, I'm a Christian. I wasn't always a Christian, though. And when I look at the nations of the world that have Christian roots in them, you know, they aren't perfect by any means. They make all kinds of mistakes, but there's much more freedom and liberty in those countries than in the countries that are oppressed by Islam. There's one of those surahs that says, surah verses, that when you get the upper hand, do not give, you know, way to those that believe differently. It's something like that. Okay, let's move on here into the sects of Islam. And this is kind of what happened to my we're having problems here. Oh, it didn't get turned on.
That would be helpful.
Okay. Yeah. So there we go. Looking at there we go. Yeah, I kind of have a fun photo for you. The mom says, "I am Sunni." The father says, "I am Shia," and so the little girl says, "I am sushi." Kind of fun. I want to read this paragraph to you at the top of the page on lesson 7. And this is a true story. These are all true stories, but this one is really touching. "It was Mr. Wilson's tears that led me to become a Christian," said Abbas Abari. Abbas was a Muslim cleric in the town of Damgan. When the Reverend Ivan Wilson, a missionary in Tehran, came to this little town and began to distribute Christian literature and talk with people about Christ, Abbas came one night to call on him. His purpose was not to become a Christian or even to learn what the Christian teaching is, but to demonstrate the superiority of Islam to Christianity and to humiliate the missionary. Mr. Wilson talked kindly to the Muslim caller and explained the doctrines of the Bible to him. But Abbas made the usual response: "No, Jesus was not God's son. He did not die on the cross, and he foretold the coming of Muhammad. Also, the Christian scriptures have been corrupted, and Christians worship 3 gods. The missionary patiently tried to explain the misunderstandings and answer the arguments of the Muslim, but all to no avail. Abbas began to feel very proud of himself that he had defeated the Christian teacher in argument when he saw a strange sight. The missionary began to weep. Years later, in an interview with Abbas, he said this: "Mr. Wilson came here, he talked with me and argued with me, but I felt I had overcome him, and I was feeling very proud of myself. Then that man of God felt so sorry for me in my unbelief and pride that he began to weep. His tears did for me what his arguments did not do. They melted my heart, and I believed and became a Christian. Later, I was baptized." You know, you can have all kinds of poignant arguments with a Muslim or people in other religions, but sometimes it's simply the deep compassion in your hearts that will change them, that will really move them. I would like you to, oh my goodness, now this is, okay, that's okay. I would like you to turn to page 157 in your notes, or excuse me, in your books. And I want to read the beginning of this chapter. It's chapter 9, and it's actually the title of it is the same as the title of the book, Allah Weeps. And it begins with a series of stories of surrender. And this one begins, Hassan grew up in an Islamic fundamentalist community. He hated seeing crosses around the necks of his Christian schoolmates. Up until he was a young adult, those children continued to experience this wrath of his through his zealous verbal abuse, his belittlement of their every activity, and even his physical attacks. One night, however, Hassan dreamed he was wearing his own cross, imagine that, and Muslims were ridiculing him about it. He finally understood a small portion of what Jesus had suffered on the cross. His zeal for persecuting Christians became a zeal for learning about Christ. He located a missionary, got a Bible, and began clarifying his thoughts by writing them down. 6 months later, his mother discovered his writings, and notice this, his father had him arrested. Hassan had to leave his country to keep from being killed, but he was so thankful to God for revealing to him the love of Jesus Christ. Hassan became a witness about the peace and truth that he has found in Al-Masa Isa. Please say that with me, Al-Masa Isa. And that means the Messiah Jesus. That's how they refer to him. The top of page 158. By reading the Bible, Hassan discovered that Al-Masa Isa wept over Jerusalem. Jesus knew that the Jews would reject the peace and truth found only in him, and he also knew the city would be destroyed as a result. So Jesus ended up weeping. One more paragraph. Today, Allah must be heartbroken over the warring Islamic spirit that incurs great harm in his name. He must weep for Muslims who forsake the peace and truth found only in Jesus. So, I remember one person, they asked me, why did you name it Allah Weeps? Well, the reality of it is that Muslims, especially Arabic-speaking Muslims, the only word for God that they know is Allah. I've explained this before. So when they get saved, they're still going to say Allah for God. And so in a sense, Jesus is Allah. And we know that Jesus wept over Jerusalem, and I believe that God is heartbroken over the many Islamic terrorist types of things that are going on supposedly in his name to the people in the world. Okay, let's get back into the study here. We look at the sects of Islam, and the words sects, branches, divisions, and denominations are often used interchangeably in books and internet sites when referring to the main parts of Islam. So first of all, you have the Sunnites, S-U-N-N-I-T-E-S, the Sunnites. Sunnis are orthodox and led by majority consensus. So that means they actually vote on who their leaders are going to be. It is estimated that 5 out of 6 Muslims are Sunni. Much of what this course is referring to are the practices and beliefs of Sunni. One of the main differences between Sunni and Shiite is centered on who would rule after Muhammad. The Sunni accepted the 4 caliphs, which means caliph is Arabic for leader, that succeeded Muhammad. At the time, these were considered the best men in the community to lead it. Their position was not based upon kinship with Muhammad. Sunnites are considered moderate. And then contrasting that is the Shiites. And the Shiites are radical and led by specific authority. From the earliest days, a smaller group of Muslims held that only a member of Muhammad's family should succeed him, and since he had no son who survived him, it was thought that the only rightful successor was Ali, the husband of who? Fatima, that's right, the daughter of Muhammad. The special appointed family leaders were called imams and were considered by Shiites as the rightful political and spiritual rulers of Islam. The Shiites are more important and fanatical than the Sunnites and take the Quran more literally. Shiites have a clear majority of the population in Iran and some other places. Now, the branches of the Shiite, I just kind of want you to see there are three different groups. One is called the Fiver Shiites. The second one is called the Sevener Shiites, kind of interesting. And then you have a third one called the Twelver Shiites. And they each have their reasons for why they are a part of these groups. And the Twelver is the largest group. These people have a strong desire for salvation, interestingly, thinking that the 12th Imam is the Savior who will come out of hiding at the end of time. Now, you're going to, from this point forward, as you maybe in the news hear about the Iran and some of the leadership of Iran and things like that. Actually, in the last few years, they've had those that were from the Twelver perspective. And so they have some different ideas about the future of mankind, and it's kind of interesting. One thing to note is that their Shahada, this mic is just a little bit hot, that their Shahada adds a phrase, and this is, the creed that we talked about the other night. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger, but they add, and Ali is the friend of God. So they add that to their Shahada. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger, and Ali is the friend of God. And so basically that is a part of not just the Twelver, but that's a part of the Shiite creed. And then you have the idea of the Sufis. Now, the Sufis are an interesting sect of Islam. I talked about them last night. They are marginal, maybe only 1% to 2% are Sufi, but the Sufis are mystical and led by individual quest. This is like folk Islam. They are rejected by many conservative Muslims for their beliefs. Sufis are not concerned so much about traditional Islam or monotheism. They often practice animism and spiritism. While former Orthodox Islam is concerned about ultimate truth, about the nature of reality and the way to heaven, folk Islam is not. It is more concerned about day-to-day living and will use whatever it thinks might work. An example could be, quote, a father with a sick son will ask the mullah to pray to God for him, tie an amulet to his arm to drive off evil spirits, and give him modern medicine to kill the germs, all at the same time. And then you have some of the significant differences. This mic is just too hot, so I'm going to move it down here. See if that helps a little bit. Some of the significant differences between the Sunni and the Shia, if you look on the left, you see the Sunni, and they are the majority, 80 to 85%. Once again, the Shia are, or the Sunni are the majority, the Shia are the minority, 15 to 20%. The leadership in the Sunni is the community elects the best leader. The leadership for the Shia, they are a descendant of Muhammad. They must be a descendant of Muhammad in order to be in the leadership of the Shia. And then in the Sunni, you have the Orthodox, the Sunnah traditions. We've talked about that before. And then the word actually, Shia, is derived from the idea of being radical, a follower of Ali, who was once again related to the Prophet Muhammad and was the fourth caliph. And then the Sunni, you have the imams, which are any teacher. So you can go into a mosque here in this region or in the state here, and it's probably going to be a Sunni mosque, and the leader of the mosque is going to be considered an imam, the leader of that. But if you go into a Shia, only a very few people are going to be called imams. And those are people that are direct descendants of Muhammad in one way or another. The idea of the Sunni, they are fatalistic. We've talked about this before. They believe everything is predestined by Allah. And then you have the Shia, which are more about free will and that people can choose Allah or not. The Sunni tend to separate religion from politics, whereas the Shia question the legitimacy of any earthly power that is not directly related to Islam or that descends from the prophet, really, that any kind of government entity that doesn't have somebody leading it that is descended from the prophet. So that's the difference between the Sunni and the Shia. And this debate goes back a very long way. Paul Valley wrote an article here a few years ago which says what most of the crucibles of conflict in the Middle East have in common is that Sunni Muslims are on one side of the disagreement and Shia Muslims on the other. The division between Sunni and Shia Muslims is the oldest in the Middle East. And so when we get into wars over there, or we go over there and we think that we're going to help them figure out their problems, you know, sometimes we're shooting ourselves in the foot because we don't even realize some of the ancient rivalries that are going on over there. It really takes a lot of diplomacy and working with them to try and resolve and bring about any kind of lasting change. And even with that, the best intentions sometimes is probably just not going to happen. Now, some of the views about the Mahdi, this is kind of an important thing, the views about the Mahdi, M-A-H-D-I. Now, to the Sunnis, the Mahdi will come to rule before the day of judgment and will rid the world of evil. His coming will coincide with the second coming of Christ, who will assist the Mahdi against the Antichrist. Just kind of an interesting perspective that the Sunnis have on the end times. And I skipped this part, but number 1 in your notes there, under Roman numeral 2, the various passages in the Hadith prophesy that the Mahdi will descend from Muhammad through the line of Fatima. He will have the same name, fight oppressors, unite Muslims, bring peace and justice to the world, rule over the Arabs, and lead a prayer in Mecca at which Jesus, Isa, will be present. And so that is the idea there. And then for the Shia, it's different. The Mahdi already appeared once, they believe. Being born in 869, he disappeared and will remain hidden from mankind until he reappears to bring justice to the world. This doctrine is called occultation. Allah is hiding him until the right time. And so this is a whole different idea. And then once again, we have these 12er Shiites. Now, to them, the hidden Imam was the 12th in succession from Muhammad. And he is Muhammad Hassan al-Mahdi. And his reappearance will coincide with the second coming of Christ. Together, the Mahdi and Jesus will bring peace and justice to the world. So in Iran, where you see the large concentration of Shiites right there, and the biggest group being the 12ers, they are actually looking for the second coming of Christ. But in their worldview and view of, Islam, it's going to coincide with the coming of the Mahdi, who is going to be the 12th Imam. So in the future, where you hear this idea about the 12th Imam, they're really talking about eschatology and about the coming of the end. And so that's a big deal for them. So various people have claimed to be the Mahdi, including Siad al-Muhammad, known as the Bab, who was instrumental in launching Baha'ism. Please say that, Baha'ism. Baha'ism today is now it's a pretty big religion in the world, the Baha'i. The Baha'i are quite aggressive. I've been to a Baha'i temple before. They have 9 openings. Like, it kind of represents their religion. I went to one down in Panama. There's also one over in Israel. I have not been to it, but it's in the city of Haifa. And you go into these temples, and basically, in their viewpoint, there have been 9 manifestations, like of God, that have come. One of them being Jesus, but the very last one happened in like the 1840s. And the Bab to them was kind of like our John the Baptist in Christianity, who was announcing the way. And then, they believe that that the second coming of Christ came, and that is how Baha'ism got established. And so basically, it's this Baha'u'llah is his name. It skipped my mind for a second, but it means the glory of God, and that is kind of like the second coming of Christ. And so they believe that Baha'u'llah came in the 1840s, and so today they believe that he was the Christ. And so sometimes they will try to convince Christians that Baha'u'llah was the Christ. He was the second coming of Christ. He was the one that was foretold. But they believe that he was merged with the 12th Imam. And so that in Baha'u'llah, you see all of the coming all wrapped up into one individual. Well, that did not go well with the 12ers. That did not go well with the people in that society. And so the Baha'is came under intense persecution, death and things like that. They survived. And so today you see Baha'i groups of people around the world, and you could even go along the highways in America, and you'll see little places where it talks about the Baha'i faith. So they've grown in their world religion. That's kind of what they're all about. Have any of you ever met anybody that's a Baha'i before? Or, okay, yeah, they're quite aggressive in their evangelistic tactics. They've usually read Old Testament, New Testament, the Vedas of Hinduism. They've read many of the religious books, and they will just really get into a debate even in order to prove their points. Okay, and so then we move into the festivals and calendar events. Once again, this month, Muharram is the beginning of the Islamic New Year. Now, some strange things happen. You have the Ashura festival, the 10th of Muharram, and in the Shiite Muslims, they reenact the martyrdom of al-Hussein. And so basically they will take knives and things like this, and they will cut themselves, they will cut their children, and this is a part of their festival each year as they celebrate the 10th of Muharram. Does anybody remember what the 10th of Muharram represents? Exactly. It was the beginning of the calendar. That's where they are going from Mecca to Medina type of thing. And so, good memory. All right. You have these different things here. You have celebration of Muhammad's birthday under letter C there. The Mawlid al-Nabi. And then you have different Eids. You have two different Eids under D there. You have the Eid al-Fitr, the celebration at the end of Ramadan. They really want to eat a lot at the end of Ramadan, the month of fasting. So they just, they pull it all out. They don't eat any pork or anything like that, but they will just, have a great feast. And then you have this other celebration, Eid al-Adha. And it's another celebration, but in Pakistan, they actually will sacrifice camels in order to have a feast. And so in different places, they will sacrifice different things. This is at the end of Hajj, where they will celebrate it. But they will, in some communities, they'll sacrifice sheep or goats or whatever. But in Pakistan, and I've been there when they've done it, and it just smells all over the country when they do it. I mean, we're talking, 96% of the population is Muslim, and so, wow, there's just dead camels everywhere that they have sacrificed. And then, of course, they will distribute the meat to family and to friends or to the poor. Now, in your notes, just kind of reading through this, you have the meanings of radical and fundamentalism. The word radical has a lot of different connotations today when applied to how people view things. You have this idea of rad, You know, this is a popular urban word for something popular. Oh, that's so rad, you know. I remember my kids used to say that. And I was like, rad? I used to know a guy named Rad, you know. And then the Shia are considered the radical part of Islam, but that is only in respect that they differ in view from the Sunni over who should lead. And number 3, in politics, it can refer to people who want to rapidly change laws or methods of government. In religion, it can refer to fundamentalists or extremists. And so letter B there, the word fundamental means primary, basic, essential, radical, of central importance. Fundamentalism at its core is a response to the problems with modernity. I think that's an important thing for us to understand right there. Fundamentalism at its core is a response to problems with modernity. You know, things are changing. Some people don't like change. How many of you don't like change at times, you know? I'm kind of that way myself, you know? Things just keep changing and changing. There are fundamentalists in every major religion who want to protect what they believe to be the essential doctrines and traditions against the critique of modern skepticism. So number 2, in Christianity, fundamentalism has been associated with an early 20th century movement to maintain 5 basic standards of Christian belief. 1, the inerrancy of the Bible. 2, the virgin birth of Jesus Christ. 3, the substitutionary atonement. 4, the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ. And 5, Jesus' imminent return to the earth. These standards were proposed at the Bible conference in Niagara in 1895. So that was kind of the birth of modern day fundamentalism in Christianity. And so people might look at it differently, but that's at least one view of it beginning. Number 3, in Islam, the word Salafiyya is often equated with the idea of fundamentalism. Those who hold this position assert a literal interpretation of the Quran and that modern society should be ruled in accordance with Quranic values and Sharia law. It is an attitude against the sweeping changes of modernity, especially by the ulema, Islamic scholars of Sharia law and theology who want to protect traditional Islam in Western society. In Islamic jurisprudence, the word usul, I guess, refers to fundamental principles, and this other word, usuliyah, usulia, to fundamentalism. And so those are some basic ideas here. I still have a couple minutes left, so let me get to this. So you have the word Salafism. The word Salaf means predecessors. And the basic idea behind it, this movement, is that the first generations of Muslims who conformed closely to Muhammad's model are the best examples at how to live. They base it upon this surah that you see in number 4 there. The messenger of God is an excellent model for those of you who put your hope in God and the last day and remember him often. Surah 33:21. And so they really believe that the way that the prophet lived is the way that people should live today. And then you have this idea of Wahhabism, and it's based upon the teachings of the 18th century fundamentalist preacher Muhammad ibn al-Wahhabi. And this is really important because we have seen now, as we've looked at the history of Islam, that it moved from Arabia, the peninsula of Arabia, to these different locations, to Damascus, over to Egypt, to Spain, to various places, the Mughal leaders, and everywhere. Well, Saudi Arabia finally, when the Sauds got in power several hundred years ago, this Wahhabi movement began because they wanted to return the whole thing back to Arabia, where it all began at. So this struggle began, and so this idea, this fundamentalist preacher, started to emerge, and so basically, it says in your notes there, under number 2, he and Muhammad Saud, a militant chief of the House of Saud, conspired together to see that Mecca and Medina would be restored to the center of the Islamic world. Number 3, the adherents of Wahhabism today prefer to be called Unitarians. Please say that, Unitarians. And then finally, you see this idea of the Muslim Brotherhood. Founded in Egypt in 1928 by its first and primary teacher, Hassan al-Banna, and it called for jihad to resist British control and Western modernity in Egypt. So we will pick it up there after the break. So let's take a 10-minute break now, and we'll meet back here.